And so I do think having a personal brand that is built on my faith and values, my political beliefs, my business beliefs, my family, all these things are really interesting. And people want to know that you're not just a one trick pony, you know?
Welcome to Benefits Broker Boost, the show that gives employee benefits brokers practical strategies to grow, scale, and streamline their business. Presented by Plansight, where innovation meets efficiency in employee benefits. Now, let's dive in.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. I'm joined today by Sean Turner. Sean is the owner of Buffer Insurance, founder and owner. And I'm really excited for our conversation. If you recognize Sean's face, he's had some notable press coverage in the industry in the past. We'll get into that a little bit later. But if you're like, I think I recognize him from somewhere, that's probably where. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Adam. This is going to be a really great conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Sean. Where'd you get your start in the industry? How long you've been doing this? And tell us a little bit about your agency.
Yeah, so prior to starting the agency, I actually worked for a financial advisor, and I thought I wanted to become a financial advisor until I started working with this specific group, and decided at that point I'd got my insurance license, but I was really just doing administrative paperwork, learning about annuities, and kind of going in a different direction. And then decided, kind of got a wild hair, decided to start an insurance agency. Just because of friction at that company I was working for as an admin was really becoming too much, and I didn't agree with the direction my life was headed. And so went on vacation, felt like I heard from the Lord to start this insurance agency, and just had some faith and stepped out. And my wife and I had just moved into a new house. It was new to us. The mortgage was more expensive than our last one, and we had two young kids. And by the time I started this agency, we just, when you want to start something new, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have all your ducks, you don't have a ton of capital saved up. You're kind of just going through life, and you get that feeling like, if I don't do it now, when am I ever going to do it? Or you're going to look back 10 years from now, man, I wish I had done it X number of years. And so I
And
think I
now,
was.
8 years in, you're probably really, really excited you did it when you did.
Well, I wish I had done it sooner, but I didn't know. So, in fact, when I was looking for this next venture, and I didn't know at the time it was going to be an insurance agency, I just Googled what's the highest paying position in all 50 states. And it didn't have AI at the time. This is back in 2017 when I was Googling this, and it was like financial and insurance services. And I thought, okay, well, I can kind of just sidestep a little bit over here and just pursue a different niche within this overall arching industry.
Awesome. Well, we'll get into this a little bit, but there's been a lot of shaping of your career through the ownership of the agency, and but let's start out with your military service, right? You were in the Army infantry for, I think you said, 8 years. Prior to starting this, your military experience clearly shaped your mindset and your discipline. If anyone's seen any of your other interviews or conversations, there's a lot there. But first of all, thank you for your service. That's something that I was never in the military, and I always ask myself if I could do that, and I'm not sure I could. So thank you very much for being willing to do that. And secondly, I'd love to talk about some of the lessons from your time in the military that most influence how you lead and operate your business. We were having this little pre-conversation where you said you don't learn a whole lot of applicable actual business skill, but there's a lot that translates into leadership. There's a lot that translates into habits that you form and those types of things. So I want to talk about that first before we jump into the nuts and bolts of starting your agency.
Yeah, so I joined in the military, and I was 19 years old, and then ended up choosing Army infantry just because I saw all these videos. And at the time, there's all these really great commercials coming out for the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, and joined the Army infantry because what was happening in my life is I was in college. I'd done several semesters. I was headed towards getting a bachelor's degree in economics, and thought, hey, if I do the Army infantry, basic training and advanced individual training, AIT, it stacks perfectly in between school semesters. And so I can go do this and I'll just join the Army National Guard because I can be reservist. Well, I go and do the basic training and learn a lot from just um, other soldiers who were going through that process together. But 3 days after I get out, I got accepted to UT Austin. I get down there and I get a phone call saying, "Hey, you're being deployed to Iraq." And I was like, well, this kind of throws a wrench in my whole plan of like going back to school and finishing this degree. So I spent 13 months in Iraq. And it was one of those things that you kind of question politically, like, why are we in this war? What is going on? And so if you've ever seen that movie, Jarhead, where they kind of get over there. It's very political commentary, but the whole point is like you go through these life struggles, and there's so many inflection points where you have this struggle, and then you get to the other side, and there's quite a few lessons you can learn from that. And so one of those lessons I would say is just keeping hope when things are hard. Like that's so important, especially for those entrepreneurs who are just starting an operation of their own, who have stepped out and they don't have the capital that they need to necessarily get them all the way through. That grit and that determination to keep going is like super important. And it's not necessarily blind faith because blind faith says you don't have a plan other than just to step out. That's
Mhm.
kind of a bad idea. But I would say it's you take these calculated plans and calculated risks, and then you take a step of faith at that point, and whether that's I'm going to call on new clients or I'm going to try a certain sales pitch, um, and then I would say like obviously the military shaped my mindset, but through the military, you have a lot of downtime. There's a common thing in the military, it's like hurry up and wait. And so it's like your leadership, whoever's over you, hurry up and get this task done. Well, you hurry and get it done, and then there's like this communication gap as to when the next instructions come in. So you are kind of just hanging out. Well, I ended up filling that time with listening to audiobooks. And I would listen to so many different types of genres of books from nonfiction and fiction, but I really started honing in more on business books. And those I think shaped my mindset at the same time. And so even books like Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, like that was kind of a formidable book because at the time I didn't know how trading your time for money was different than basically working toward building an organization that can work for you and earn money when you're on vacation versus like a dentist they've got to go in and unless they have a bunch of teams working with them if they're just going in seeing an appointment and then they get paid for that appointment. And so changing my mindset slowly, even like a book like The 2-Day CEO that sets processes in place. At the time when I was in the military, I mean, I was young and just loved our country, loved shooting stuff, loved teams. And I realized I needed a mentor. And I really couldn't find a mentor. I didn't know anyone successful at the time that was in business. I didn't know anyone who was willing to give their time. And so most of like the role models I had were like very distant people that were inaccessible. And reading those books, getting access to people and mentorship through reading a book and getting their best formulated ideas articulated on paper really helped me during that time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, just last week had a podcast episode that we recorded with Scott Milson. He's president of Florida for several years, um, and he talks about that topic actually. You know, the unofficial mentorship, right? None of these people that wrote these books were your official mentors, but you know, learning how they're doing things, consuming more content from them, you know, and I think the age that we're in, the internet age, if you're willing to put the work in and you know consume videos that the people are putting out and follow their social content and read their books, there's a lot that can be gained from that unofficial mentorship, and he refers to that as the mentorship gap, right, where the official mentorship is far less common than trying to become friends with someone or just emulating what they're doing. So I love that you brought that up, and I've had similar situations where I've read a lot of material from a certain person. I'm like, I like the way that they operate in this regard. And then I start to study all of it, you know, consume
Mhm.
their YouTube videos, their social media, and start to formulate that plan forward. So like, that's a great point. Okay. So a lot of leadership opportunity came from that. And then right at the beginning, you talked about starting your agency and how you have two kids. Now, I watched a different interview with you, and we talked about this before we started recording, but about 6 weeks into starting this agency, you mentioned there's never really the right time as an entrepreneur. This was probably, if you look back on it, you could easily talk yourself out in hindsight if you knew this was going to happen, but you had kind of this like back against the wall moment 6 weeks into ownership where you found out that you're about to have child number three, right? Well, not about to have, you're pregnant with child number three. Um, and, in starting a business, that means trying to figure out your own insurance, trying to pay for that, all those fun things. So explain that moment to all the listeners, and then talk to us about how you use that to kind of feed your entrepreneurial drive.
Yeah, so I just started the business, and there was a lot of challenges leading up to starting the business, like what name do I choose, all these things, and you get all these kind of administrative organizational things in place, and then it's like, all right, it's official. How do I get clients? And so I literally spent every day, all day, on the phone with like just trying to call people, and at the time, I was doing a lot of Medicare sales and employer benefits sales. And so it was really difficult to switch from one type of sale to another. And so I would block my time out and use it so that I could just focus on one type of strategy for that period of time and then move on to the next. Well, I was on the phone with a prospect, and it is rare to get someone on the phone the first time. And so I got this guy on the phone. I was like, oh, yes, he's actually listening. The conversation's going well. And then my wife walks into our home office and hands me this, what I thought was a thermometer, because your brain's in this phone call. And she sits on my floor and starts crying. And I look more closely at it, and I was like, this is not a thermometer. This is a pregnancy test. And so I kind of get to a stopping point in the conversation with this guy on the phone and say, hey, can I call you back? I had something just come up that's important. And I'm looking at this, and I can't tell how to read this thing. But it's just a line. I'm like, is the line a good thing, or is there supposed to be two lines? Like, I don't know. It was confusing. So I look at my wife, and she's crying. I'm like, is she crying because she's pregnant or not pregnant? I don't know how to read the situation. So I just ask her, and she tells me we're pregnant with baby number three. And I thought, oh no. Like, how did this happen? Well, I know how it happened, but what are we going to do at this point to like get through this? Because it's not like when we started our business that we had this like massive amount of savings. Like we only had enough gas in the tank for a few months, and then otherwise we're gonna have to go apply for food stamps or something. I don't know. And so at that moment, I thought, you know what? My back is up against the wall. Like, there's no time to start this. I'm so glad I didn't find out this news before I started, because if I did, it would have given me one more excuse to put on the balance to weigh against starting this. And so we went ahead and obviously powered through, and it just gave me that much more energy to go out and say, you know what? I'm not a quitter. I'm going to finish where I started, and just had that much more reason to go and make more phone calls and close more clients. And so it really was a pivotal moment. I didn't know how pivotal it was at that time, but internally, it's one of those things that really lit the fire underneath me to make this thing successful no matter what.
Yeah, that's. I've talked with a lot of people now that have started businesses in my network. There's a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's really interesting how often that happens. You get this new business going, and there's this turning point or this inflection point where something happens that, all right, it's make or break now, right? And if you haven't, if anyone listening has not read the book The Obstacle Is the Way, I would strongly encourage them to do so. But that's kind of what this is alluding to, is right, you had this obstacle that was like, okay, well, and now I've got to make this work, and I've got to work harder to make this work. And that turned into what is now a thriving agency, right? You've grown from zero to a thriving agency. That comes with extreme highs and extreme lows along the way. So I want to go into, how do you mentally handle those wins and losses in business and keep the right outlook as you move forward?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Let me think on this just so I have a better answer. Because one of the things is I found from working with different employers, even through our employer benefits department, you come across a bunch of different types and styles of people. And so there's some who they come year after year asking for a proposal, and you hand it to them, and it's like they analyze things so much that time runs out. They don't want to make a decision. Let's just do this again next year. And then there's people who they can make a decision like that and move forward, and then halfway through it, they're like, "Wait, what did we choose? Why did we choose this?" And it's like they're the activated people, but not necessarily the strategic. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's all these different types of people we have to deal with in business. And I think um, one of those most important people is yourself. And so when I was starting the business, at the time, I was not a very strategic person. I just kind of had this hunch and I went with it. But then I also wasn't like an engineer where I tried to like know everything about the product before I presented it to the client. And instead, what I would do is I would surround myself with people who knew about it, whether that was a general agency or uh, a carrier representative. And I would talk to them about it. Hey, just give me enough. Like, what are the sweet parts and what are the weaknesses? And then I get the client on the phone and try to understand their pain point. And I think that was the most successful thing for me was getting the client, asking them, number one, open-ended questions instead of closed-ended questions that were a closed-ended question, like you don't want them to say just yes or no. Obviously, like there might be a few you want them to say yes or no so that then you can continue your sales pitch or your kind of lead them in the right direction. But then really getting them to open up about their pain points because once you understand their pain points, you know what product to maybe put in front of them that will solve it. And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of the obstacles that we have though are through our own beliefs. And I think getting through those is probably the most important because then you can remove obstacles that are in your head, whether they're from childhood. I call them the self-limiting beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
It's those beliefs that are put on by your parents who said, oh, you'll never be enough, or whatever the situation where it's bullies at school. And then you start hearing these statements about who you think your identity is, and then you start believing them. Well, part of being an entrepreneur is like you starting to understand yourself and your own restraints and your own strengths and removing those self-limiting beliefs is hugely important to make sure that you have success and can finish something that you start.
Yeah, that's very profound, right? That's one of the things that I've personally had to learn about myself is that half of the stress that exists in my life is imagined. It's things things that I've made up that put me in stressful situations. That's not how the other person that's part of the conversation is feeling. That it's I'm just overanalyzing things, and I'm thinking that someone is thinking this, and now I've got to like figure out how to have a good counter argument for that, and cause a lot of stress. So there's a lot of truth to the person inside of your brain being one of the biggest obstacles to moving forward. And it's been great to learn.
Well, and as an entrepreneur, like I happen to come from something that was totally outside this industry. And so I had perspectives from the military and perspectives from other industries that I had participated in leading up to insurance agency. And I was like, you know what? These ideas work for this other industry. Why don't they work for this? And
Mhm.
so I started asking people, hey, what are you doing around this XYZ problem? Like, oh, that's just part of it. Like you just got to live with it. I'm like, no, there's no way. And so you can apply other solutions in other industries to your industry, but then you also kind of have to become the leader or the salesperson or the role to make it work. So if someone's starting out and maybe they work as an account manager for like one of the top insurance agencies that are international or national, and they think, hey, my employer is making a lot of money off me. I can do this better and cheaper and make more money myself. But all they've ever done is account management. Well, they know a lot about products, they know a lot about renewals, and they know a lot about how to strategize for the next year, but they know nothing about going and getting new clients. And so you might have strengths going into this role, but you kind of have to learn your weaknesses and really work on those so that you can. And in my case, I really did like sales. I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, I'm gonna read a ton of books on sales so that I can figure out which sales techniques work and which don't. And that way I could pull something out of my back pocket and reference it when I'm in that situation where I need to make the favor work towards my gain.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think a lot of reviewers are possibly straddling the line of, that we have a lot that have already started their own agencies, but there are a lot that straddle that line of, I think I could do it, but I'm not sure what I'm missing. And I would echo that is, before you branch out on your own, if that's your goal, understand what your strengths are, and understand that there are a lot of pieces to building a business that probably don't lie in the strengths you already have, and then learn those as quickly as possible. Right.
Oh
That's
yeah.
sounds like that's kind of the route that you took. Okay. So when you started your agency, you intentionally didn't name your agency after yourself because you didn't want to build around your identity. Right. Um, but you've personally had some pretty viral moments in the industry, and I want to talk about those viral moments. And then I also want to discuss. So you've got this kind of juxtaposition of, I was trying to build this agency not around my personal identity, but I got quite a bit of airtime for some of these viral moments. How do you balance the personal brand and the company brand in this founder-led marketing world that you're in?
That's a great question. I think there are a lot of companies who are doing this founder-led thing. You even see like Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Meta, like
Mhm.
he had this moment of transformation when several years ago he went in front of Congress for possible political manipulation and all that, and he just was this like suited up guy, looked like a lizard because his skin was just like pasty white, had these
Mhm.
big eyeballs, and people there was memes that were like unforgettable on this about this guy,
Yeah.
and he probably read those and thought, I don't like what people are saying about me. I'm gonna transform to a different person. And I don't know. This is all assumptions I'm making, but you see over the next few years after these congressional hearings that he transforms into, he's got longer hair, it's curly, he's wearing t-shirts and not suits, he's wearing necklaces, and he's going to UFC fights, and he's got this totally transformed personal brand that now is humanized and relatable. And I think there's something for small business owners to learn there, is that they don't want to work necessarily with a corporation. Like your clients want to work with a person. If they know that they're working just with a corporation, that means to them they're not meaningful. Like that relationship is not meaningful. It's just like you're another cog in their wheel kind of thing. And so it is very important when you're figuring out a name. And in my case, I mean, there's a lot of companies that use their names, especially car dealerships. And so like they use their name and their name means something. I didn't necessarily want to build it that way because I wanted to have a team who could call and say, "Hey, welcome to," in our case, Buffer Insurance, which it's funny how we even landed on that name, to be honest, because I had Googled so many names like Canopy Insurance and Umbrella Insurance or whatever it was, and they're all taken. And so almost now you have to like come up with like a made up name even that that might take two meaningful words and merge them together. But
Mhm.
we had landed on this name, and part of it, my thinking at the time was that if we have a company name and they go to our website, we can still make it look like a personal experience. But I wanted people to know when they call in that I didn't want them to think it was just me selling insurance out of my trunk, out of the car. And
Mhm.
so when they would call in, I had this phone system. It wasn't just my cell phone number. It was a voice over IP system. So they call in and they get like press one for XYZ, press two for ABC, press three for employer medical. And our prospects and clients, they didn't know that when they press all those numbers, Sean's the one that's answering every single one of those. And so it was a tool just taken from the book Art of War, where it says when you're small, look big, and when you're big, look small. And so we were trying to look bigger than we were at the time.
Mhm.
Whereas Facebook and Meta, through that founder-led marketing, Mark Zuckerberg is trying to make Facebook look smaller than it really is by by that human connection. And so I do think that although I love insurance and I love the the protecting aspect of insurance, insurance isn't the only thing I'm interested in. And so I do think having a personal brand that is built on my faith and values, my political beliefs, my business beliefs, my family, all these things are really interesting. And people want to know that you're not just a one trick pony, you know? And so, to your point earlier about us going viral, there was a moment back in 2022 when there were some legislative changes, and we had decided, and the legislative change was a major overturning of a Supreme Court case, the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, and
Mhm.
basically made it up to the states as to whether they wanted to allow abortions or not. And so we live in Texas. That's where our
Yeah.
business is based. And so Texas was one that was not in favor of abortions. And the main media narrative at the time was that it's okay, employees of these large corporations, we're going to help you get rid of your babies by helping you pay for a travel abortion by going to Colorado or California, wherever a state is that might allow you to get rid of your baby. And I just kind of froze in this moment. I was like, you know what? There's got to be another way for those people who believe in life. And so I told my team, which at the time we only had 4 people, but they're all in their 20s and 30s, kind of in that stage where they're growing their families. I was like, I'm going to pay for the birth of y'all's babies. If so, what that means, like we implemented a policy to pay for the medical costs associated with the birth. And if the employee wanted to adopt, we pay for that medical costs. And then we implemented a new policy at the time. We didn't have maternity or paternity leave, which is pretty common in small businesses because anytime someone's out, I mean, the whole team feels it. And so we implemented those policies. And my assistant, she was like, Sean, I think we should share this online to let other business owners know why we're doing this and how we're making it happen. And I was like, no, I don't think so. And I'm the type of person who's like, let's just stay focused on the mission, you know, that's
Mhm.
distracting. And so, unbeknownst to me, she put it online, and next thing you know it, like we had a local lady, Allie Beth Stuckey, ended up sharing it, and she has, I don't know, at the time maybe a couple 100,000 followers. And then the next day I wake up and someone sent me a Facebook message, "Hey Sean, is this your company?" And she sent me the link, and all of a sudden we're on listed on Ben Shapiro's show. And I was like, is this one of those spoof links? You know, when you click on it, it looks like the dailywires.xyz
Yeah.
instead of .com. And so it just sprang into this like crazy time for us where I ended up being on like 75 interviews within like 2 weeks from Fox News and Breitbart and TV shows on TBN and a couple different wild places. And I had never expected to be on these TV shows, but what a fantastic time for me to help employers know, hey, if you want to have maternity leave at your company, you can make that happen through having a short-term disability policy. And this is how you can execute this policy so that you're not having to pay this huge amount of money all at one time. And so it was a neat way to have a message, not necessarily about buffer insurance, but about, hey, this is a way to think about a problem and we have a solution, and it really impacted hundreds of companies. Maybe thousands, because I mean we had people from Spain reaching out to us. We had people from Canada. I even had like little old ladies from South Dakota handwriting notes and then sending checks to us to say, hey, we love what you're doing. And it was a fun time, but then also you have to think about the flip side. Anytime you get any media attention, you're going to attract people from both arguments. And so we had people calling our company, even though we're just saying, hey, here's the solution. If you want to help one of your employees' babies or help their family grow and remove obstacles from helping their family grow, we had people calling literally to give us death threats. And hey, we want your your kids to die. Like I mean, just like the most horrific things you could imagine
Yeah.
that came up, I would say, as frictional things, but it's one of those things when you hear people who have like you and I are both busy people, and so anytime we see someone we dislike, we don't think, "Oh, let's call those people up and wish death upon them." Normal people don't do that. And so it's one of those times that our team really had a lot of compassion for these people calling in who were threatening their lives. But it's like, you know what? There's something here that hit a string with them, and it's hurtful. And so we, instead of having hate back towards them, like we really did have compassion for them.
Yeah. Well, that's a really, really good example of doing the right thing for the right reason. I see a lot of companies try to kind of like manufacture this virality from being good, and you can kind of always see through it. Not always, but a lot of times you can see through it, where this is just a, hey, I think this is the right thing to do. You weren't even aware that it was happening, and it turned into a really phenomenal growth opportunity for your company. So much so that I've seen you talk about in other interviews that you had to shut your phone systems down because of the call volume. And I'm curious how that moment reshaped your thinking around systems, around automation, around responsibly scaling, because you had this inflow of people that were interested, national coverage. And you had to take a step back as a business owner and say, how much can we actually do the right way for clients? Talk to us about that learning experience.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think when you have $100,000 business, you have $100,000 processes, and as you have a $500,000 business and you still have $100,000 processes, something's going to break. And
Mhm.
so you really have to scale your processes, and they do get more complex as your organization grows. But a prime example of that was that on our contact us form on our website at the time, when someone filled it out, I mean, we had a basic, I don't know, $2,000 WordPress website at the
Mhm.
time. And when someone filled out that contact us form, it simply just sent me an email with the information from those forms. And we got thousands and like tens of thousands of requests. So much so that, for example, I went on a interview with a guy named Chad Prather, who's part of the Blaze Network, and he's local. He's there. They filmed their podcast right out of Universal Studios, where they filmed RoboCop. And so I was like, I'm not going to pass that opportunity. So we go in person, and I had my wife, and we had 3 kids at the time. She brought all the kids up to the office, and I was like, all right, babe, when this email comes in about employer benefits, send it here. When this email comes in about this, send it to this person. And so she had like 3 people to send emails to as they came in. And I had like 200 emails unread. By the time I came back 3 hours later, I had even more emails. And she was just clicking as fast as she could, sending those emails. Well, that was an example of broken process big time,
Mhm.
because we weren't able to appropriately follow up as quickly as we wanted to. And
Yeah.
so what we ended up doing over the next few weeks is hiring a developer to then feed that information into our CRM, and then creating a basically logic rule that says if they check the box for employer medical benefits, it then assigns it that a follow-up task to that department or that individual. And so it really was an example for us to take advantage of scaling our business. But there was no need to spend the money on that prior to that point, because that would have been a waste of money. Because I mean, we got one person submitting something every other week or something like that. And
Yeah.
so it's one of those things that business is all about constraints, and you don't want to invest money if there's not a constraint around something. And so
Yeah.
if the constraint is leads, then you should be putting your money towards leads. If it's retention, then you should be putting your money towards retention of clients and figuring out that problem.
Yeah. That's a great example. And I see that a lot actually, that there's a point in the business, and it takes a good awareness of the business. Yours was kind of an outlier, right? But it takes a really good awareness of the business when you don't have an external factor like thousands of leads coming in, to
Hmm.
realize where that bottleneck is, right? But I've also seen people that have had that type of success, like you saw, where the leads flow in and they try to do it with their old processes, and they get to a few of them, they get some business from it. And then they're like, man, I wish I could recreate that situation again, right? And instead of fixing the system and capturing as much of that as possible in the moment, they enjoy the moment and get as much of it as they can with their old system, And then once it dies off, they're like, how do I recreate that? Right. So, um, yeah, that's
Well,
really great example of systematizing around the constraint quickly.
systematizing, but then also at that moment, I had this light bulb and I didn't know like that we are going to go viral. I had other insurance, like actual companies reaching out. Hey, how did you guys do this? Like you said, they're trying to ride that wave and participate in this thing. And I didn't know like it was just it just hit, out of the blue. And so
Yep.
we weren't planning on that. In fact, before that, like the type of people who would like our Facebook posts and Instagram posts were like my mom, my aunt, someone else's, like all of our employees and their families. And so
Yeah.
it's not like we were getting all this traction that we were posed like ready for it. If it were today, like we would be much more prepared for it. But
Mm-hmm.
I learned that in that moment, though, that people buy for different reasons. And so some people buy because you have the best product or service available. Other people buy in this moment, they were buying because of they're voting with their values. So people say, hey, I align with these people's personal beliefs and their values. And so I want to spend money with them. But
Mm-hmm.
then we had clients and prospects say, hey, like we were, I don't know, in the sales process with a 300-person physician group that was local. And the lady saw me on Fox News talking about this. The next day, I sent a follow-up email, hey, when can we chat? And she just simply said, I can't do business with people who are forced birthers. And I'm like, I don't even know what a forced birther is. I looked it up and found out, oh, she doesn't want to do business with me because I am promoting people that they should be forced to give birth to this baby. And
Yeah.
I didn't see it that way, but it made me realize, oh, people do care about values. And so then it comes back to, all right, are you going to shrink away and keep your values quiet? For me, my values like make up part of my identity. And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm very vocal. I don't necessarily have all of my belief system articulated, and I'm not always putting it out there like, hey, Buffer Insurance is a pro-life agency. That's not what we lead with, but that was kind of a byproduct of a certain situation. I would um, just consider, all right, if you were to be put into a situation where you had to verbalize something, are you going to kind of dance around it? Or are you going to be bold? Or are you just going to reverse the tables and not answer? And so it's definitely something at least thinking about in case you are put in that position.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that's interesting to hear that you also lost some business because of it. But yeah, in the long run, uh, probably gained a lot more. So um,
Significantly.
yeah, that's so I've seen you talk about the difficulty of when you're building a business as the first employee, the founder, turning things over as you grow, right? That's a harder thing than a lot of people realize, right? That you're wearing all the hats and then you've got to turn one of the hats over and say, hey, here, do this, hopefully as well or better than I was doing. Um, that's hard for a lot of people. There will be people that are watching this that are in your shoes or that may be in your shoes, those shoes that are transitioning from one to multiple. What advice do you have for founders that are struggling with releasing that control? How do they avoid becoming the bottleneck and empower their team to exponentially grow?
Yeah, I think so. When we hired our first employee, it was about a year and a half after we started, and you never have enough money for that next hire because what happens is you you start getting accustomed to the certain lifestyle. Like, oh, the money's coming in, and it's called lifestyle creep. Your lifestyle grows to your income. And so it's like one of those things, well, I wasn't wanting to turn away from my lifestyle, but I also can't afford to hire this person. I know I need them. And
Mhm.
so we hired him. I was like, you know what, if it doesn't work out, I can always just let him go in a couple months. And so I got to the point where I had too many renewals and I was also focused on getting new business. And I had let a few renewals pretty much just thankfully they auto renewed, but we never got to a consensus as to what the next step was. And I realized I am not serving my clients well. Like I can never let that happen ever again. And so the difficulty was like, well, I like the growth path we're on. So do I hire a salesperson or do I hire an executive assistant, or do I hire someone who can really focus in on the account management and renewal? And so there's like a lot of different paths and types of people I could hire. And it really was difficult for me to figure out who did I want to hire. But it went back to, no, I need to try to work my way out of this business. And so instead of hiring an assistant would take off maybe uh, low leverage activities so I could go focus on more stuff, more sales. But that then still keeps me as a cornerstone of the business. And so I ended up, my very first hire was a lady named Shelly, and she had no insurance experience, but I wanted her to come on as like the account management for our employer benefits. And one of the problems that we had when she started was that, I mean, we had a laptop. Her and I shared an executive office together, and I didn't have anything written down. It was all in my head.
Mhm.
And so one of the very first obstacles that we came up upon was, well, Sean has all the knowledge. How do I get it over to Shelly? And so having her in the office with me was very significant because she just picked up on a lot of phone calls I was on, and she kind of gleaned stuff here and there. And then she would ask me a bunch of questions in between. Well, fast forward to our next account management hire, and it was one of those things that we knew we needed to transfer that knowledge more efficiently and effectively. And so at that point, we had started identifying what are like not the SOPs, like standard operating procedures, but what are the different major functions or nuances of certain carriers, and like how can we document that? And so we found a tool that essentially allows us to document all that knowledge, and it's searchable. And so it's like an online Word document essentially that has all this information. And so we started building this manual, this tool that now is hundreds and hundreds of pages for many different states and many different carriers. And it's like the brain. And I think that was probably one of the most important pieces was hiring someone, letting it go, but then also for your next hire, like you need to have this thing. And my whole concept for that was if Shelly gets hit by a bus, like now our business is way too much for me. I need someone to come in like ASAP and train up. So how do I get all of Shelly and Sean's knowledge out of their brains and onto paper? But like to your point though of hiring someone and letting go, like that is so hard, especially when you think you do it the best and you don't want anyone to fail or lose that client. I can tell you today, our team still makes mistakes. And if they make a mistake that loses the client, we don't shrug it off because we want to take every moment and learn from that. But the reality is your team is going to make mistakes. And so you have to determine what are you going to do when they make a mistake, or how big of a mistake are they allowed to make? And so how much authority or power do I give them, or what accountability do I put in place? Because the worst thing that could happen is they make a mistake and you don't know about it. And
Yep.
so putting it in place that a culture or an atmosphere that when they do make a mistake, if they know every time they make a mistake, you're this fire breathing dragon and they feel like they're going to lose their job or get screamed at, like that's not a great culture to allow people to make a mistake and you learn from it and instead they're going to start hiding it. And so there's a lot of pieces to this as you continue to look to grow, but a lot of it comes down to what is the culture you're building, what are the documents and resources you're making to help train, and then thirdly just letting them fail in a way that's not going to take down your business, but then also, and that might be as simple as, hey, we have 50 clients and 10 of them are like key accounts. Well, maybe you just hold on to the key accounts and manage those, and then they work on like the 2-person or smaller clients that if they lost it or made a mistake, like who cares? You can get another one of those,
Mhm.
until they've built trust up enough to where they can handle the larger clients.
Yeah. I like to say that if someone takes the time out of their day to watch an episode of Benefits Broker Boost, they walk away with something they can do tomorrow in their business that makes them better for having watched it. I think this is a really great. I think there've been a lot of this, but I think this is a really great one. You mentioned lifestyle creep, right? That as you make more money, your ability to find places to put that money equally grows, and it's a true thing. Um, and as you're looking at growing outside of yourself and scaling a business, you have to constrain that lifestyle creep to a point that hiring that person doesn't affect your lifestyle. So you've got to limit it at a point that you've got that buffer in there that says, okay, this much I could use to go hire this person. I've already not let my lifestyle creep in on that much. So I'm not actually going to take a step backwards in the things that I'm already doing in my life. That's, I would say, I watched a lot of people try to scale past this. And that's the hardest part for them is they get comfortable with this lifestyle that has this much that they can spend on a monthly basis. And they try to hire that person. And that is going to encroach on that at least for the initial phase of growing this. Ultimately, it should allow you to grow further. But your business, your book of business is your book of business. Unless that person brings over a book of business, they're a cost until you can add more business because of what they're doing. So make sure that you control your lifestyle creep to a point that you can hire that person without having to change your lifestyle. And then that's not a step backwards for you. It's something that you've already factored in. Find the thing that, and I think that hire depends on, you mentioned that yours was an account manager. You could hire an executive assistant, you could hire a salesperson, and it depends on what you want your role operationally in the company to be. Right, Sean, you were mentioning, I want to try to work myself out of the company eventually, just be the leader of the company, not be the producer. So you strategically hired certain people. But if I'm like, hey, I want to be a producer for the rest of my life, then maybe I take a different approach to it. And how do I build some pieces around me that let me produce even more? But then you hire that person, you get that. But this is the really hard part, is that you're going to want to scale past that first person. That first person needs to be the right person. They need to be the person that's going to ask you all the questions and help you document, get all the things out of your brain that need to be there for the next person that needs to take that role, the next person that needs to take that role. And it sounds like you did a really great job of that. Just think through those things. As this is me talking to anyone that's listening, as you're scaling, ask yourself those questions first, get really clear on that. Make sure that if you're spending all of your income on a monthly basis, it is going to take you a step back. So make sure you build in that buffer for yourself before you make that step. And then, hire strategically based on what you want your function in the business to be. So really, really great thoughts there. Did I summarize those okay?
Yeah, those are good. But I would say lifestyle creep is easier if you haven't done the basic necessity of separating and having a business checking account that all your commissions and payments are going into, and then you pay yourself to your personal bank account from there. If you have everything going to your personal bank account, it's hard to tell the numbers of how well your business actually is doing.
Sure.
And so you really got to start from there to make sure there's separation. But then secondly, when you're going to hire, you want to hire, I would say the account management is important. You never want yourself to be the primary account manager, because then you always are busy and you really can't delegate the sales and growth early on in your business to someone else, because otherwise you'll have a revolving door of salespeople, because hey, they say they can do great and then they just fall flat on your expectations, and then you start over again, and then you start over again. And so you really have to build it in a way that you are the primary kind of salesperson for your business until you've built out quite a large team. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're cold call prospecting. Your sales cycle might mean that you are building up a bunch of referral sources, and then that way I think building up referral sources is probably the easiest way to step out of sales, is because those referral sources, once you've stepped out of sales, they'll continue to refer people to your business, and then you can kind of feed them those to the salesperson that you've hired, and then they can close those deals that come through with your coaching and mentorship, instead of just spending all their time cold calling. And so maybe they're spending half their time processing these referrals and then half the time cold calling. And so that's probably the easiest way to transition out of sales.
Awesome. Yeah, that's super helpful. Okay, so I want to shift gears a little bit. We're coming up towards the end of time for the podcast episode, but these last two questions are some of my favorite questions. So there's a lot of how do I put it, in the insurance space right now. There's a lot of forced change happening. We're seeing increases that we've never seen in the past. And we track all of this through Plansight. We're seeing higher increases than we've seen any other year, causing employers to look at their health plans differently. It's causing brokers to have to be more strategic than they've ever been to make things fit in cost, but still get good health outcomes. We're seeing this kind of whole shift to a point where we're going to need to actually solve the problem of health in the United States rather than try to just put a blanket over it, right? And pretend it doesn't exist. You've been a steward of this thought for the entire time you've owned the business, right? Is help your employees live healthier lives. And I think we're going to see companies take serious approaches to, hey, it's not just the steps challenge anymore, right? It's not like, okay, go get your steps and you're going to get a discount. They're going to take a completely proactive approach to helping people actually live healthier lives. It's the direction that things are going to be forced to go. And you can argue with me on that. That's what I personally believe based on what I'm seeing in the space right now. Um, how should employers approach healthcare and wellness differently if they want to make a long-term effect on the health of their employees?
Man, there's so many issues. And I think the primary reason why health insurance is going up is not necessarily the utilization, but it's the environment that the government's created through the Affordable Care Act, through the American Rescue Plan Act, and some other things that presidents have implemented year over year. And it's one of those things that we've made it a safe place for insurance companies and healthcare products like Lilly, who's coming out with all the Ozempic and other things. We've created incentives that are creating the wrong effects. And so we've put the incentives in the wrong places. And so because the incentives are here, everything kind of goes towards where the money is being either given or doled out.
Mhm.
So I think from an employer standpoint, those are all things that you can't necessarily directly affect, and so you don't want to get so caught up on, oh, it's someone else's fault, and kind of play the victim. You really want to, yes, you can vote for leaders who are maybe going to make a positive change for healthcare, but at the same time, like you want to work on controlling what you can influence in your own organization. So I think it's as simple as I would go to work with my dad when and he worked in these call centers. He was a kind of a computer technician. He'd go in and help fix or update these large phone systems. And we'd go, and I loved going with my dad to work. He had a bunch of different clients, but the reason why I loved going with him was that every time I went to a call center, they would have donuts and like all these amazing dessert snacks and these vending machines and stuff like that were like just amazing snacks when you're 10 years old. And then I'd see the people in those call centers and see how they're overweight or have diabetes or have all these health issues. And it's like, hey, these types of things that we're doing in the moment to celebrate someone's birthday, it might feel like we're doing everyone a great favor. But then when your organization gets so big where you're celebrating a birthday every third day and there's a constant flow of all these unhealthy snacks, that's probably a culture issue. And so you really want to be careful with the things that you're tolerating in your organization. And so if you don't like what you're tolerating, then change that and you'll change the culture. So like we have a value of health, and so health to us, and it's even on our website. You can go to the About Us page and you can see all of our core values, but one of them is health, and we have 3 impact statements. And so it's basically a statement that defines what the success looks like when you execute in that value of health, and it hits on physical, mental, and spiritual. And so we think that a healthy person is someone who advocates for a healthy lifestyle. So you're not just living a healthy lifestyle, you're trying to advocate for other people to also live one. That's a different level of health. If someone's able to advocate for that type of lifestyle, that means that they're championing it. And so includes, I mean, mental and spiritual health, because we know, hey, you could have the best physique in the world, but if you have a terrible mindset or you feel like you have a lot of stress at home or these other environments that are affecting it, like you're a whole person. And so I think from an employer standpoint, the most simple yet overlooked is creating values in your organization that other people can aspire to like live up to those standards, and health being one of them. And then the second one is, yeah, like you mentioned it. I mean, you can do things to reinforce those values. You can have, I don't know, maybe you make it a tradition that you guys have a 5K that you guys run every year, and maybe you give prizes to the people with the fastest times or something like that. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can do to champion these things that will lead toward lower cost healthcare at their organization. I mean, it's a known fact that as people become better runners and work on lowering their cholesterol, that they will have lower heart issues and less prescriptions and things like that.
Mhm.
So I would say that's really where it starts. But then, I mean, there's a whole nother layer beyond that, but that's really the foundation.
Yeah, that's great. Had another conversation where, yeah, he was talking about larger companies and going in and educating about health and things like that. And you had mentioned trying to get your employees to take on the role of advocate of health. And he had mentioned, in order to get cultural change in an organization, you need those advocates, right? It starts with one person getting amazing results from deciding to make healthier choices, and then their friend asks them, and their friend asks, and then they get the results, and so it's kind of a healthy spiral, let's say.
Yeah, because it's not just about education. Because, like, if you took that argument, for example, you look at a pack of cigarettes and it says on there cancer causing, blah, blah, blah. It has all it's like this massive label. People still smoke cigarettes. Do you think
Mhm.
it's because they don't know it's unhealthy? No. And so it's all about the pressures people experience from their peers, and then the culture and what's valued and what's not valued around them. And so I think that's a much easier thing to control than just hiring young people. Because the problem was, hey, if you really want to directly affect your health rates, just hire young people. Like older people are more expensive. But then if
Yeah.
you had an organization of just young people, your organization might make a lot more costly mistakes.
Yeah.
They might not have the expertise that you need to sell your product. And so it's not about ageism. I mean, that's not a good solution to lowering your healthcare costs. Like, there's a lot of senior people that bring a lot of experience and maturity to the team that your company needs, and so
Mhm.
that's not necessarily the answer either.
Sure. Yeah, you've got to figure out. It's almost top down that you have this culture of health and of really wanting people to be healthier in the company, and not just saying that you want people to be healthier. So, um, yeah, really great, great advice there. So, last question, and this is one that I really love, and that is, and I ask this to everyone. So, what what has you most excited about being in the employee benefits space in 2025, going into 2026, and what changes do you see happening in the next 5 years?
Oh man, there's already been so many changes in the last couple of years. Like one thing we saw early on back in 2018 was the adoption of level funded rates and level funded plans. And so I had this thought at the time. I'm like, this could cause a major disruption in our industry. Like if we just move every moderately healthy group over, like they're going to have immediate savings by doing these medically underwritten plans. But where does that leave all the fully insured carriers? And in fact, in Texas, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas is one of the most competitive, largest fully insured carriers. Well, we're already starting to see the effects of this, and so all the less healthy groups are stuck on these fully insured plans that they can't get off of through medical underwriting. And
Mhm.
so then the utilization goes up and then it's year over year. So it's already started to happen. So it's like there's like a two caste system, but it's not like these things are in a silo by themselves, because if Blue Cross, who does offer fully insured and level funded, it still all rolls up to the same company. And so they still have profit margins. They can't have like massive losses over here and it not affect this company over here. And so I think because of that, we're going to see these top 5 carriers are going to be slower to respond because these changes that have happened to allow for these level funded groups, I think we're going to start seeing more startups come up that are strictly just level funded. And what I mean by that is because these large companies like United Healthcare and Cigna and Blue Cross and all these companies have lots of different lines of business, they're either going to cut lines of business that aren't profitable and sell those off, or they're going to be like dinosaurs and they can't necessarily move because one change over here also affects this different type of product. And so I think there's going to be more space for small companies to step in, and whether that's they're offering localized regional carrier like health, because there's a lot of problems even with hospital systems. In the companies right now, what they're fighting is they're fighting the networks. And so instead of just fighting the networks, they're creating their own branded clinics. They're starting with their own, like they're trying to consolidate to where they own everywhere thing down from the healthcare disbursement, whether that's a pharmacy or a doctor's office, all the way to the top line hospital system and above, and the payers. And so there's a lot of vertical alignment, but I think that there's going to be more space for new startups to come in with, and I think these startups are going to not necessarily care about fixing problems within the healthcare industry, but it's kind of like back in the day, banks, like the best business plan was just start a bank and then it would get purchased. And so I think we're going to see a lot of healthcare companies come in and challenge these major companies and see disruption, and then they're going to get bought by those predecessors.
Yeah, that's really interesting perspective, and something you have to look at the whole picture, right? There's things that are better for each individual employer, but you're looking at how that impacts the entire ecosystem of healthcare.
Well, it's like, all right, so how do we as brokers respond to that? All right, so if we think that this alternate universe might come true, what could we do to help evolve with that? It's like, all right, in the past, I would have a million different companies asking me to sell their product, and I would always tell them no. And I'm like, hey, I got these 5 tools over here. I don't need any more. Well, maybe as a broker, you should start at least entertaining and hearing what they have to say rather than just deleting that email that they sent you. I think at least being aware of what products are available that your competitor might be offering that might kind of tickle the ears of your group. It's at least wise to be aware of what those products are, but then I think it's also wise to see which ones have the right financial backing, because we've already started seeing this happen, this trend of all these new products pop up and then a year and a half later they're going bankrupt. And you don't want to put your client with a product that's not financially stable and can't withstand one market cycle.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. Well, that's really, really interesting outlook on the industry, and great advice to brokers. And it's what we're seeing a lot of. Like when I said brokers are having to get more strategic, that's exactly what I'm referring to is you may have to look at other options than what you have in the past. And you may have to get quotes from more places than you have in the past. And that's, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. So really, really great insight. Sean, I appreciate you being on with me today. This has been another episode of Benefits Broker Boost. If people want to get in touch with you, Sean, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, y'all can just go to LinkedIn. I'm active on LinkedIn, and then or email me, Sean@bufferinsurance.com. That's SEAN at bufferinsurance.com.
Awesome. We'll add that in the show notes as well. So if you're looking for it, go to the show notes. But really appreciate your time. Make tomorrow better than today.
Yeah, thanks, Adam.